welcome to another of our web chats, of our school's web chats, where we discuss current topics in massage and soft tissue therapy with the top educators, therapists, or clinicians, whoever wants to talk about massage therapy and soft tissue therapy with us. And they have something valuable to share. Last week, the past chat we was with Matt Phillips, where we discuss gait analysis and how we can introduce gait analysis into an evidence-based approach of care. And today we do have somebody quite special, actually, somebody that I've been following for many years, for I would say a decade, actually, Eric. And this is tonight with us is Eric Purves from across the pond from Canada. Eric has been working, Eric is a massage therapist. He's been advocating evidence-based practice in massage therapy for the last, as I say, for the last decade. And one of my students will know about Eric Purves because the first day, the third slide of the first day, there is this lovely quote which says, we do not need to make up stories. Massage and movement are therapeutic. So because we interact with each other's nervous system. I know that you wanted to change that quote a little bit, isn't it, Eric? But welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. I'm honored and privileged to be here, and it's always nice when people feel that what I have to say or what I have to share is valuable, and so thank you very much for being here. And I think when you and I first connected a few years ago, it was probably during kind of the pandemic lockdown. You had said that you'd been sharing that quote from a blog I wrote, which I think was from 2016, maybe.
Yes, 2016, correct.
And it was such I felt such a feeling of I don't know, gratitude, or just an overwhelming feeling that, oh, people are actually paying attention to things I'm doing that I don't even know. And so, but yeah, that quote that you said, because as we learn and we grow, right, you know, we kind of probably whatever 6, 7, 8 years ago, we were trying to move the focus more away from like connective tissue, pathway, anatomical, structural things, and we kind of tried to I'm saying like this, like we is this like omnipotent kind of like group of us, you know, I mean, like those of us that were kind of learning and developing, the focus tended to go, oh, well, we're not impacting connective tissues like muscles and fascia. We're interacting with a nervous system. And then what ended up happening, what you realize when you start to reflect on that, you're like, well, I'm just blaming another tissue. I'm just finding a different thing to blame. So that quote, I would say, if I could write that quote again now, I would remove the word nervous system, and I would just put in person or human.
Yeah, you know what, Eric, I couldn't agree more. There is the danger that we're becoming too neurocentric and still, therefore, for kind of being too focused on one thing. Doesn't have to be structured, but it's still focused on one thing. But the complexity of the person and the person experience, it's way more that neurocentric approach. And in fact, even when we discussed about, we discuss in general about, you know, mechanisms of, mechanisms behind touch and massage therapy. Yes, there are neurocentric mechanisms, but they are the smallest part of a bigger, many more factors like psychosocial factors, like contextual effect, non-specific effects, therapeutic alliance, and so on, that actually play a part and not just. So we have to be very careful. It's easy to, I found that it's easy to talk talk the talk, but actually, eventually we can go back. There is the danger that we go back into that dichotomy.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point to make, because inherently we want to fix people. That tends to be this kind of how do you say it? That's just kind of how, as a therapist, you kind of go into school thinking, I want to help people and I'm going to help them by fixing all their problems. And we look for the one kind of root cause of it. But then once we kind of, you have personal experience and you kind of get, you spend a lot of time, like people like you and I, reading a lot of literature and taking courses and listening to podcasts. If you start to realize over time that, that way of thinking is incomplete. I would say a lot of times it's totally incorrect, but I know I don't want to throw everything away because I don't want to go to any extremes. So I'd say oftentimes our thinking is incomplete, and it is easy for us to kind of go to this dichotomy and, oh, I'm working on nervous tissue. I'm only impacting one system. And when we think about it, the mechanism is what we do. When we're putting our hands on people, when we're interacting with people, it's very complex, and there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of stuff that we probably aren't aware of what's happening. But it's almost an oversimplification to think that we're just impacting one tissue and one part of a person, right? You put your hands on someone's skin because that's what we're touching. You're not just impacting the skin. You're not just impacting the receptors and the peripheral nerves. There is muscle and there is connective tissue and there is an entire system, or some people say an apparatus there that's being interacted with. So if we say we're just impacting one thing, it's incomplete because it's way more complex than that.
And it's a person living in an environment, and we cannot differentiate those. I couldn't agree more. And we already started. We just went into full discussion, quite a deep discussion.
Sorry, yeah,
it's
exciting. I like talking about this stuff. I never get bored.
Yeah, I could even take it. But today, actually, Eric, we invited you here because one of our strong we're advocate of the use of massage therapy for persistent pain and fibromyalgia. And you actually recently, together with Richard Lebert and Monica Noy, have released a paper on the use of massage therapy in chronic pain. So I wanted you to kind of give us a little bit of an overview of the paper, and also how do you see massage as part of chronic pain? Because it's interesting what you said about causality as well, because, wanting to find the cause, and that link very well with chronic pain, because we don't often, we cannot attribute, we should not attribute the cause to something. So, if you can give us an overview.
Sure. Yeah. The other author on the paper was a woman named Jacqueline Tibbett. There's 4 of us on there, and she's a massage therapist, and she has a PhD, and she lives in Florida, in the United States. She's actually did her PhD in spinal cord injuries and the use of massage therapy as a kind of pain management intervention or pain management option for people with spinal cord damage. So anyway, she was really interesting. So the paper is called, so thanks. Yeah, it's fun to talk about this paper. We wrote it a long time ago, so I had to reread it because we wrote this thing. This thing started in 2020. I think Richard reached out to me during a lockdown when, I think a lot of us were looking for things to do. And he said, hey, I want to write a paper on person-centered approach to chronic pain. I thought, oh, sure. And we went back and forth a couple times with some ideas and some drafts. And then he wanted to bring in some other people, which I thought was great, just to get their perspective. So he brought in Monica and Jacqueline as well to provide their thoughts, ideas, and I think the paper came out pretty well. I was really happy with the finished product. I would say this paper was probably 99% Richard's. I mean, it was his idea, it was his baby. The other 3 of us, we put our thoughts in and ideas and our kind of some of the research we were familiar with and some of the wording. But it was, I got to give him full credit where it's due that this was his paper. I'm just a co-author on it. But the paper is published in the Journal of Therapeutic Massage and Bodywork. And it's called Massage Therapy, a Person-Centered Approach to Chronic
It's an open access, isn't it? We can put the link under this chat.
Please, I think this is one of those things, and okay, bias alert here. This is one of those papers I think is really important that all massage therapists or any but soft tissue therapy, if you're touching people, if you're working with people that hurt, I think it's really important to know this stuff. And really, as the chronic pain is an area that's where I got my start into teaching and into reading, and because what I was finding was that I didn't really understand it. People would come in and you treat them and you'd follow these kind of biomechanical approaches and these tissue-based approaches, and they didn't really work. And I was starting to see a lot of people coming into the clinic at the time that just were suffering, and they had everything done to them and they were still not getting better. And it started to make me ask a lot of questions. I'm like, I have no idea what the hell is going on. I don't understand pain. I thought I did. I had no idea until I took a dive into the research and went to this rabbit hole that a decade later is where I am now. And the more I learn, the more I still realize I don't know. So this kind of paper tries to basically, it's about 4 or 5 pages long, where we try to say, look, the person-centered approach is basically focusing on trying to help somebody that hurts by listening to their story, by following the evidence, by avoiding useless treatments. And we don't know, and I think one of the quotes in here, it basically says that we don't know the mechanism a lot of the time. There's something we don't need to.
Yeah, we don't need to.
But we can follow an approach which will help people at least hopefully suffer less, or at least gain some control or some understanding of their situation. And it's really about, when we talk about this shared decision making, and there's a lot of terms, right, that you use, like what's evidence-based practice, what's shared, decision making, what's evidence, or what's person-centered care. We have it all identified in here, what it means. But really what we're trying to do is that we're trying to say that, people that have persistent pain, it's complex. There's a lot of stuff going on with them, right? And there is obviously biological factors that are creating some nociceptive drive. There's also a lot of social and psychological factors and lifestyle factors and all these other things that are also contributing to their experience. And it's not just the pain, it's the pain and this related disability and the suffering. And I think that's one thing that is often missed in these conversations, is that when we're talking about following this kind of person-centered, shared decision-making, biopsychosocial approach, what we're really looking at is we're taking this zoom-out approach and be like, what are the things that are impacting this person's experience, and what are the things that we as clinicians can help? And what can we do? And we can provide options. We can provide touch that feels good, that hopefully lowers that sensory experience of pain. And maybe we can work with them to try and find out some other things that they can do when they're not with us to self-manage.
Yes. I love. Yeah, sorry, Eric.
No, it's okay. I could talk forever, so interrupt me.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I really enjoyed the paper. A couple of things I really enjoyed of it. One is that you start with kind of the statement, say that we as massage therapists, we're already showing empathy. This is what we do well. We are compassionate with our hands, because this is who we are as massage therapists. This has come to us very natural, and that it's actually puts us in a very favorable position or advantageous position to provide person-centered care and to provide care within the very important BPS framework. So I really like that. But also what I liked, that massage is seen as part of a bigger intervention. It's only an encounter. It's not the intervention. Like I always say, I started being really strong about massage is the context where the real intervention or the real therapeutic encounter, which is education, which is active lifestyle advice, which is helping the client making sense of pain, takes place. Is not the intervention per se. That is especially true, in my opinion, with people with persistent pain. because they just for some of the people with persistent pain, they need to be exposed to the symptom modification before they can even start making sense of pain. However, I got a little bit of a contradiction myself in my own thoughts about this very often. I see in clinical practice that touching people, like you say, touching nicely, people with chronic pain helps them to expose them to symptom modification, and then they often helps them cope better. But I wonder, are we reinforcing, however, a need for symptom modification?
And that's such a great point, because that is what oftentimes, I'm not familiar with any research on this, but there might be some out there. Maybe somebody will watch or listen to this and they'll share some. But from clinical experience, right, which we know is part of the evidence-based kind of practice framework, from clinical experience, you see that a lot where people would, like, this is the only thing that works, so they become dependent on that. And that is always such a difficult situation to navigate, because you say, well, if you're having trouble self-managing and coming to see me or coming to see a massage or soft tissue therapist is the only thing that seems to really be helping you, then why would we want to take that away from you? Because we want to be part of this, your self-management plan. And maybe it's this long-term self-management plan, and maybe you were part of it. And I would say, you don't want to fire your client or your patient, because if you're the one providing help for them, then why would you take that away from them? Because then that might lead them further down a kind of negative journey. However, though, if we reinforce that, yes, we are the only thing, that's where the problem is. You need to come see me once a week for the rest of your life, because I am the one that can provide this for you. And I would say, that's not okay. I would say that's unethical, and that's not evidence-based. However, I would say that if we can do things like, utilize our relationship, utilize our treatment,
skill set,
as part of it. But the focus is, we need to find things that you can do when you're not here, because you can't be here all the time. Another key thing, which I don't think gets talked about enough, is the financial costs of that. What if somebody is living with persistent pain and they are working part-time, or they're on disability, or they can't work, or maybe they are working but they don't have insurance coverage? And I don't know what it's like in the UK, but here in Canada, massage therapy is covered a lot by people with private insurance plans. There's definitely a real problem, I would say, if people are coming in all the time and they're paying out of pocket and they can't afford it, and we are not trying to give them other options other than us. I would say that is a problem, and I would say is unethical. And I did see that more often than I would like to admit in the clinical world.
Yeah, I mean, here in England, it's not under NHS, so it is full private care. So for us, it's even more important to actually make sure that our intervention, our treatment, it's actually best place for the person at the time. Because if they have to spend for us, let's say £50 to come to treatment, and actually the £50 could be better spent to do something else for their condition, that this is where we need to be really very aware of our scope of practice, or what evidence is telling us, what the client's preferences are. Because often client says, you talk a lot about self-efficacy in the paper, and as we want to stimulate self-efficacy, because that should be the outcome of every interaction, isn't it? Encouraging self-management. But actually, I even have clients saying, what about if I don't want it? What about if what I want is to come here for the 45 minutes, for the hour, is to remove the responsibility of myself having to cope or having to manage that pain. For that hour, I want you to have that responsibility. I hear that very, very often.
Yeah. And, and that goes exactly with, I think, kind of some of the concepts that we're trying to say in this paper, this, person-centered shared decision-making. If you have had that conversation with somebody and you've given them options and they, and they want to utilize your services and your expertise as part of their management plan, then that's okay, because you're not fraudulently trying to tell them that their ongoing pain is because they've got some stuck tissue or some joint that's not moving or some postural fault. You're not blaming some, one of the terms, I can't remember who uses it, the pathoanatomical boogeyman. I can't remember who uses that. I'm sorry, I forget to whoever. Anyway, it's not mine.
Greg Lehman.
Maybe it was Greg.
Yeah. Greg.
I think it was another Canadian. Anyway, as long as you're not, as long
another Canadian.
Just saying, yeah. As long as you're not blaming that stuff, I think it's and the person knows what they're agreeing to, or they know their options. That's ethical. That's evidence-based. That's person-centered.
That is very powerful, actually, Eric, because this is where every massage therapy, every soft tissue therapist, does not matter if you are in a spa or you are the clinical remedial, talking about here, clinical soft tissue therapist, you need to understand really well what is the need and the preferences of the client at the time. Because actually, if they say to you, help me to manage this chronic pain or help me to find strategies, so that then it's your responsibility not to make them dependent. It's your responsibility to actually frame that the massage treatment within active advice and so on. But also it's, the client might say to you, you know what, I just come in, I want the experience of feeling good for those 45 minutes. And that's it. And I think that is okay as well. As long as it's shared decision-making and they are informed consent. My problem that I see a lot here, people with chronic pain, they seek massage therapists services because it feels good. Mm-hmm. And the language used, the treatment is so dependent, stimulating, because they provide a little bit of symptom modification and they say, oh yes, you need to come back, like you were saying before, you need to come back within 2 weeks, within 3 weeks, because otherwise, things build up again. And we need to get away from the mind frame. Yes, they feel good when they leave us. The feeling good is temporary. We need to do something with that and not just focus on that in treatment session feeling good. The feeling good should be an opportunity, a catalyst for them to be exposed gradually to something that previously might have felt a little bit unsafe.
Yeah, and that's a really important thing to touch on, is that what we do in the confines of our treatment is so limited in terms of their entire life. But what I always felt clinically, and whether people agree with me or not, is that if you could provide that little bit of symptom modification where they left feeling better, that was often very encouraging to the person to say, hey, I don't have to hurt like this. I don't have to suffer needlessly all the time. And this really comes down to, we talk about in the paper, I think there's a comment there that says basically listening to their narrative. What does the person think is going on with them? What is it they want out of these treatments? And let's have a conversation about that. Because if they were like, I just want an hour of symptom modification and I got all these other things I'm going to do, and those help as well, and this is part of it, then I'm going to say, great, you're doing well. If they're coming in and they're like, you got to fix me, and I'm like, yeah, keep coming in, keep coming in, keep coming in. Well, that they're not actually getting better. I'm actually would say that in that case, you're facilitating a continued potential disability. But the goal should always be try to say, like, maybe you're going to live with pain all your time. Maybe somebody with fibromyalgia, kind of touched on it a little bit in the beginning of this conversation, where they're just going to hurt all the time. Like that's just part of their life and it's part of their coping. As long as we're not making any false promises and we're not blaming stuff that we can't support, and we're not telling them that they're going to fall apart if they don't come and see us. We're not fear mongering them, and we see that a lot. That's kind of what you were saying. We see a lot of fear mongering. As long as we're not doing that, I think we're doing okay.
Yeah, yeah, and the symptom modification is, we know that there are some people that respond to quick symptom modification, and those when they see early symptom modification or within session or very quickly after session seems to be prognostic or positive outcome only for those people who respond to that. And I do not know if there is any studies on that, but in terms of people with persistent pain respond to input, I doubt they will respond well to quick symptom modification. That's why symptom modification needs to be used for something else. And I'm glad that you mentioned about fibromyalgia, because that's another great passion of mine, because I see quite a lot of clients. That's why I ask you to run a course for us about it, because actually in our industry, Eric, at least in the UK, there is nobody running fibromyalgia education to help massage therapists to treat people or to work with people that they suffer with fibromyalgia. That's why, you're very, very up to date with that. And I love your approach about fibromyalgia. I know that we often put it under the chronic pain umbrella, but it's quite a pathophysiology per se, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like every week there's something new I'm reading about fibromyalgia, and there's a lot of unknowns about it. It is a thing. Like, I know oftentimes in the medical community it's dismissed as like diagnosis of exclusion type of thing, but there is diagnostic criteria for it, and there is some proposed. I don't know if these are. I don't like to use the word proven, but I don't know if it's known 100% sure why people have it. But we do know that there is some pathophysiological
there is
things
a
that occur.
Neuroinflammatory issues.
That's what I was just going to say. Yeah. And I was going to say, like, that's kind of seems to be the current less wrong kind of understanding is, there's some type of neuroinflammation that's widespread. You have pain in all four kind of quadrants of your body, and there's a series of other kind of symptoms and psychological and emotional stuff that can occur with it. But the thing I've never seen, and I don't think anyone has, is why does this happen? There's some proposed ideas, which I think are some interesting hypotheses, but I think for the most part it's we don't really know. And obviously we want to have the answers, but I think when we go back to when people come to see us, if they have fibromyalgia or they got symptoms of it, maybe they're not diagnosed from it. First thing is we have to believe them.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. If someone comes in and says, and I would get tons of people that came in, they're like, "Oh, my doctor says I have fibromyalgia. I don't believe it." And the conversations would often be like, "Well, tell me, what are your symptoms? What are you experiencing?" I'm like, "Well, I could see why they would make that diagnosis." And then the person would often say, "Well, what am I supposed to do about it?" I would say,
how many times, Eric, people come in saying, I've been going to the doctor and they never believed me for years and years and years. And then they've been sent to a rheumatologist, and that's where they get diagnosed. And while there is some, how would you say, they feel quite validated with the diagnosis, because they say, "Oh, finally, somebody believes me. There is a name for all these ensemble symptoms." From the other perspective, they say, "Oh my God," they're quite desperate because there is nothing they can do.
Yeah. And that's the problem, right? Is that people often don't feel validated because they can't find, and this is the problem with kind of the medical system, is that you're looking for some kind of thing to blame, some musculoskeletal thing. So they're subjected to imaging, and they're subjected to tests and all kinds of things to try and find out, and they can't find anything. So therefore there's nothing wrong. And that's oftentimes how the message is portrayed to the person living with fibromyalgia. But what would happen to me all the time clinically is people would come in and, do you believe this is a thing? And I would say, yeah, I believe that you hurt, and we don't know why. And this is some of the proposed mechanisms, and like, do you want to hear about it? And I'd just give them a brief explanation. Well, there could be some, low level inflammation, without going to blaming the neuroinflammation, because I think start talking about nerves and stuff with people, I found that it kind of gets people excited in a not good way. Yeah, it gets, oh my God, there's something wrong with my nerves, they're inflamed. So I'd say you just got some low level inflammation, and it results in high levels, or kind of consistent levels of pain. There's things that we can try and work on together to try and help. What kind of things do you like to do? What things feel good? And then that becomes part of that shared decision making, right? You validate them. Yeah, your pain's real. You give them permission to do things as long as they feel good. And you push yourselves into some other areas every now and again to see how you respond to that. And so the question I always get asked in these courses, but I'm a massage therapist, what do I do when these people come in? Whatever they want, whatever you want. Explore, be curious, try different things, try different types of touch, try different positioning on the table, try different things, try some movement, try some resistance, try to, whatever it is, explore. And what works on day 1 might not work on day 21 with this person, or treatment 20. If you see them for a long time, they're going to be different, because people with pain, it's not the same every time. And that's okay.
This is why I think it's so liberating about person-centered care, because ultimately there is no protocol. They come in, I often ask them, first of all, what is it, the meaningful activity that you would like to go back to that at the moment you might not be able to do? So they could say, actually, just walking with my husband without, walking at the same pace than my husband, or being able to walk for, 10 minutes longer, and so on, so on. That's what we start working towards. So we give them a goal that they have set. And then with touch, like you say, is totally client dependent. And this is why, though, also, Eric, I am an advocate. I know that some people do not agree. Some people call them modalities. I just call them different way of touching. In our school, I run a lot of courses. I call it, some of them are myofascial work. Some of them is Thai massage. Some of them are hot to stones. Why? Because people are different. People enjoy different type of touch. And therefore, we might as well learn and experience how to touch people. It's not about the specificity of, that touch, that depth will create that. No, just having a vocabulary of touch.
Yeah. And that the modality empires is one of the things that kind of was one of the first things that drove me crazy when I started my journey into trying to be, I call it my less wrong journey, where I was trying to make sense of stuff about a decade or so ago. And the thing that drove me crazy was the modality empires, because they were very pattern recognition, very following protocols, and they were all based on non-biologically plausible principles. None of them are based on anything that has any evidence behind it from an explanatory model. However, because you always get the people, but I do this, and I've been doing this for 20 years, and I get great results. And this is a problem that we have in these conversations. And this is one thing I wish that I wish every single person that soft tissue massage therapist in the world could accept, that no one is ever disputing the value of your touch or your technique. No one is ever disputing your outcome. But what we are disputing is your rationale, your explanations for the outcome. That is the problem. People don't seem to get that, and that drives me crazy. And one of the things I get all the time in the courses I teach is I get people that love the simplicity. I'm like, Does the person like the swimming kind of technique, which is Swedish? Do they like the slow, stretchy skin stuff, which some people call fascia? Do they like the slow holds, where some people might call it visceral or cranio? Or do they like the pokey stuff, which some people might call trigger points? Or some people like the deep elbows that grind through stuff? Some people might call that deep tissue, whatever you want to call it. No one's ever disputing that approach, because the person-centered approach is what works for that person right here. And I feel sometimes that is, some people love that in the courses, and some people are like, oh, but I like to know what to do. Well, that's different learners, different way. You know, the people that leave feeling a bit confused, usually the response I get, if they're brave enough to respond to me later, is like, I finally get it now. I understand what you mean. But most people find it's quite freeing to say, you can just play with different touches and different modalities, if you want to call them those, to see what works for that person. I often feel, though, that some of the feedback I get, or from people that don't know me, is they think I'm like anti-modality. They think I'm like anti.
It's not about the modality.
Massage. And I'm like, if you say that, then you don't actually have any idea what I'm about. And so people that are listening or watching, I'm not against modalities. I'm against the explanations for them. That is the problem.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I actually, you know, I say to people, there is no specificity in touch. The only specific thing is the client in front of you. And the client might like a deeper touch, a lighter touch, a more, you know, broad touch. It's absolutely what the client finds comfortable, non-threatening at a particular moment. I want to pick on go back a moment on something that you said, which I thought it was really, really powerful. We're not disputing the touch, and we're not disputing the outcome, but actually I think I would be disputing the outcome, because I think what lots of massage therapists and soft tissue therapists needs to change is what they think the correct outcome is. The correct outcomes is not for the person to feel just good after the session, which is great. It's everything you said before. An outcome should be that the person goes back doing what they wanted to do, and the person goes back, you know, getting the function they wanted to do. And I think at least what I see with within our industry, and the people are too focused on their outcomes in terms of, I work with a muscle, I release the muscle, therefore, you know, the hip now is freer. That's not the outcome that necessarily. So I just wanted to clarify that, because to me that is quite important. We need to actually have a different objective when we treat people, and we can achieve those objectives with different type of touch, and that's what we're there about, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. That's actually a really good point. Sometimes you start saying words and then, you know, I'm glad you picked up on that. Yeah, I guess when I should say no one's disputing outcome, I guess the outcome is dependent on what is important to the person, rather than what's important to the therapist. And I think that's a good point to clarify. So thank you for bringing that up. That's quite powerful. If we go back also just a little bit, I always put my penny in, or pound, or whatever it is that they say in this country. You know, jump into fibromyalgia. That's my brain, my ADHD brain that jumps from one to another. Talking about fibromyalgia, one of the ways sometimes I find people respond well in terms of when we're making sense, is because they've been told for so many years that they're not being believed, and often that they get the message that, oh, it's all in my brain. I often explain it to them. I said, actually, it's your nervous system, your central nervous system, your brain, and so on. It's actually hyper vigilant, hyper irritated, and although I know that it's a neurocentric explanation, which we need in general to get away from, but sometimes to validate that for our clients that suffer by fibromyalgia, that makes sense to them, so that they know, I want to get the message out that,
you don't have an injury in the shoulder. You don't have, you might have low-level chronic inflammation, but you are, it's more systemic, it's more general. There is not an injury in your knee. There is no, so you going for the walk, if we take it gradually, we take it progressive, you will not damage the knee, albeit being painful. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point too to bring up too, Anna Maria, is that it's, and this is such a fine line, is that when we're talking about chronic pain or fibromyalgia, we don't want to be dismissive, but we also don't want to overemphasize something that might not be in the person, that might not help the person manage the best. So yes, it's very true. Is in a lot of the chronic pain cases, we know that something is driving their system, their apparatus, their system, but we may not always know what that is. But if we can rule out these kind of pathoanatomical structural things, then like you said, yeah, you can go and do those things. You can go live life and you're not going to make that area worse. Your pain might flare up, but we're fairly confident knowing that it's not going to result in more tissue damage. And in fibro as well, I agree, in fibro as well, if people are like, want to know why, we don't want to be like, oh, it's just your system and, you're just hypersensitive and blah, blah, blah. We don't want to be dismissive. I would say in those cases, it can be very powerful to give them an explanation about that hypervigilance and that inflammation in the system is, but it's also, even though that's going on, if you like going for a walk with your spouse or playing with your kids or whatever, dancing, whatever you'd like to do, giving them permission to do that with a letting them know they're safe and that they're probably going to be okay. They might flare up a little bit, but they're not going to cause more harm to their body. I think that's where that fine line is between when we're dealing with chronic pain, is it's like, if we're comfortable in saying that we've ruled out any joint or tissue problem that you might do more damage. Okay, well then if pain is your diagnosis, which I know is kind of, some people might not like that, but I think that sometimes, like, okay, your diagnosis is pain. And you have pain in that.
Pain as a condition per se. Yeah, absolutely.
Pain, you have pain in that body part.
Pain is in those cases, pain becomes the condition per se. Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I think it's important for us as clinicians to say, hey, you know what? You have pain. I believe you. I validate you. Like, I believe you. You're validating them. And then you're just trying to find out what you can work on together, right? That person-centered approach. What can you do? And whether that's touch and movement and exercise, whatever that looks like for the person, that's where we try and figure it out. It's a puzzle. And it's not an algorithm that you follow. And that's the thing that I find is so frustrating for therapists, is like, they don't really know what to do. And I think we just need to be okay with being uncertain and saying, yeah, we don't really know what to do either, but we're going to try and we're going to be curious and we're going to do some trial and error. But hopefully that trial and error is based on evidence, is based on the information the person gives us. It's not based on just like some wackadoo crazy explanation we took from some CPD course, 4 years ago, because we got 4 levels of certification in it. It's not based on evidence.
And this is why, I love the course, and I love your courses and the way that you really align very, very much the way we run our courses. And I always say to our students, both CPD and BTEC courses, that yes, we teach you the techniques, but what we actually help you is to create a framework, because the techniques are not specific. It's not about, for this shoulder pain, you use this type of hands-on technique or this type of exercise. It's the concept around it. Through the concept, which is evidence-based, then you as a clinician, together with your client, so the knowledge of the concept that you've been given, together with your client, then you decide how to apply the knowledge for the treatment that it is most suitable. And this is, that's why I ask you to run this, the chronic pain and the fibromyalgia course, because we don't want courses where they teach a protocol for fibromyalgia. but we want massage therapists to know what chronic pain is, to know what fibromyalgia is, to know what our people lived experiences because of what evidence is telling us. What is the current understanding? What are the current views? Then how can we, with what we know in touch and with what the person seek, how can we put that together to provide support for the person? And that is what is important, because that is, then it can be applied to every single different person, because it's the underpinning knowledge that we're giving that it's missed, especially here in the UK, where there is a lot of modality driven.
Yeah, I would say that I would love to teach at your school. It sounds fantastic. Like to teach the students as they're coming through stuff sounds amazing. Or maybe one day that would be amazing.
Yeah, we are. No, you're already booked. I'm gonna get you to do, for one of our BTEC students, you're gonna do one of our courses, one of our classes. Absolutely.
I would love to. That would be so fun. I would be honored to do that. But it sounds like to me, like the way you're running the things at your school there is like, that's the way it should be done. You know, you're teaching the students, you know, kind of protocols of thinking and not protocols of how to what do you do. It's more about how to think. And that is the biggest failing that I see in, I can only speak for our profession. I can't speak of other manual movement professions, but and how we are is they're very modality driven. They're like, you learn a course, you got, like, you know, here in Canada, you have manual skills 1, 2, 3, and 4, and each one you learn a different type of technique, and each technique is based on an explanation. So you learn like myofascial, for example, and then you learn like Swedish, and then you learn like trigger points, and you know, and then each one gets given a different explanation, and then people identify with which one they like to do the most, and then they apply that to a body part. They don't take this stuff and apply it to a person, to a human, or to a population, right? And that's the biggest problem that I see, is that other healthcare professions, they learn population-based, whereas we learn techniques, modalities, and then we have to try to figure out how to apply those to specific populations. It doesn't work that way.
No, and the other thing for us, which it's a little bit harder from a tutor perspective, but so we are clinicians, we are not qualifying technician. This is, for me, is really important. So when a massage therapist, soft tissue therapist in our case qualify, they have to be able to assess, treat, and rehabilitate the person. So you need the clinical reasoning. Most people that join our courses, I'm not sure in Canada, but here they're usually mature students. So somebody already had a career or second career and so on. So you have those already mature students, you have to stimulate them, encourage them, teach them how to think critically and therefore then clinically. How can you do that if you show and then get them to practice what you just shown? So what we are doing, it's a discussion based, or we call it, sometimes I run what we call flipped classroom. So they learn things at home, so we send them material at home, they learn at home, and then class we bring things together. It's just discussion, because only through them discussing, through their own narrative, through their own thinking process, that they can learn within their own already formed thinking process, which then they have to apply. So for when they're going to go and apply with the clients, they're already ready to actually apply that. Not all the students like it. Not all the tutors like that, because it's a difficult, you know, having to manage, facilitate discussions is not easy. But I think we need to get away from a protocol-based educational structure, especially in our profession, where we are very happy to be within the vocational education. We are very happy not to be in our industry. We're in our country. We're not academic. I'm quite happy with that. So us tutor needs to be, but our cohort no. And I am quite happy with that. But we need to help them to be critical and clinical, so that when the client comes in and there is all these, I'm in pain here, here, it's okay to feel, actually, we do not know, I'm certain, let's discuss, let's put all this information together and decide a treatment plan together.
Yeah, that sounds like the most brilliant way to educate.
It's fun.
Yeah.
And you know what, Eric? The things I learned, and I know this is going to sound really patronizing and cliche, so forgive me for that. But sometimes I sit there listening to some of the students' questions that their brain is void of noise in terms of industry noise. So they come in with this fabulous question. I think, oh my God, I never thought of that. Why I never thought of that? And they're just, it's just amazing. It's just that I love that. Yeah, love that. Anyway, yeah. So that was a little bit of a tangent, but let's bring it a little bit back. So, Eric, you are, as I said originally, you're an advocate of evidence-based practice. Actually, you've been instrumental in changing kind of you're pushing changing the approach within Canada and within your group of massage therapists. You created also, in order that is expressed in a group that you have, is called, please introduce the group. I love people to hear about that. I don't want to sound pushy or marketing, but I really care for the group, and I think it should be publicized.
Well, thank you, 𝐸nn-Marie. I appreciate that. Yeah, I've been working for, like I said, for close to 10 years, probably really hard for about the last 6 or 7 years, trying to change in a good way, advocate, inspire, to make the profession, at least in Canada, I'd like it to be wider spread, but this is where I live. So my west coast of Canada is, where I live. I think there's a lot more of us that are kind of advocating and talking about evidence-based practice, and it's starting to spread across the country. And you see some stuff in the States and New Zealand and Australia and the UK. Obviously, you guys are doing great stuff there. But yeah, my passion is really to elevate the profession, and that's sometimes that involves tearing down some old walls and building some new ones that are stronger and better, and maybe ones that will shift and change as evidence emerges. That's kind of what I'm all about. And I do this because I see value in what we do, and I want it to be better. So one of the things I created, I guess 2021, is I created an online community. It's called the Manual and Movement Therapists Community. I specifically didn't call it the Massage Therapist Community because I didn't want to limit it to just people that identified as massage therapists. There's some osteopaths in there. There's some fitness professionals as well, people that basically touch or move or exercise with people for a living. And so the community, it's a membership-based community. We've got people in it from all continents, all across the world. And the members, they get every month, we have one featured webinar from a different educator, researcher, clinician, thought leader. I try and make it very biased towards other massage therapists that have stuff to offer, but I do bring in researchers from all over the world and some other clinicians from different parts of the world as well. Yourself, you've presented on the shoulder in there, and there's been a couple other of our British colleagues that have been there. Tristan presented in November, maybe. So yeah, and so basically what we do is members get one webinar a month on a variety of different topics. And we also do the occasional research review. We've had some great discussions. The last 2 years, we've had a great online Christmas party, which was a lot of fun. And I try to make the group a place, a welcoming environment where people can ask questions and free of judgment, where they can
and
have
feel
conversations.
challenged. That's why I like, because it's
Yeah.
challenging. Some of the discussion can be challenging, and I think it's a very safe space to get challenged. So yes, we're gonna put again underneath this the web chat. We're gonna put the link to it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
No, thank you for providing that. So I think that's a great time to wrap up. But before we wrap up, can you give, if there is a key message that you would like to send to our listeners, to our followers, in order to improve their practice, or they can use to evaluate the practice, what would you say?
Well, on the spot, I would say that some of the key principles from the paper, which hopefully you can supply for people, are really, really, really important things to help your practice. And I'd say the first thing would be to listen to the person in front of you. Right? Find out what it is that their narrative is. Find out what it is that they want from you, what they expect from you, and engage in dialogue with them in a way that makes them feel heard, that gives them options. And I think it's really, really key for you as a clinician is to, you need to be aware of the evidence. So, and that's not something that we all want to do, but I would say at the very least, if you want to learn more about something, ask, right? And then try to incorporate this evidence into your practice to help this person, to help the people feel better, right? So don't spend your time learning all these millions of different modalities and getting certifications and that stuff. You know, be a better listener, ask better questions, or ask more questions. Listening, I think, is the most important, and try and be familiar with the evidence in an area that interests you. My area is chronic pain. That's where I find interest. So I read stuff on that all the time. I have conversations with people about that all the time because that's what I find interesting. So I use that information to try to help my practice.
And I would add, if you don't mind, because I always want to put my pen in.
Yeah.
That for those of you that do not enjoy or were not trained to read research, which is a skill in itself, this is why there is people like me, like Eric, like many other in the industry, where you can trust they're well informed and follow those people. And slowly, by following people like Eric and his blogs and so on, and you start understanding a little bit more about evidence as a secondary source, as the blogs as secondary resources, and then you can go, slowly and learn about how to read a research paper. But don't worry if you can understand, because research papers is a skill. It's a skill in itself. So that's why.
Boring.
Yes,
can be boring.
Unless you like them. To me, this is why I say to the students, this is why you pay me a lot of money, because I do the work for you.
Yeah.
And that's why we created these web chats, because we want to give an opportunity for people to actually say, this is what is the evidence. We can trust those people. And actually, if any of the listeners has got anything to challenge us on, please feel free to. We're very welcome. So, thank you very much, Eric. Looking forward to see you for our next course with us and to see you into the group. We'll put all the links. Thank you for giving your very, very precious time. For our listeners, please do remember to subscribe to our channel. There are going to be many more web chats coming up. And feel free to comment. Bye, everybody now. Till the next one.